Hello, we are ready. I'm excited. It's week 10. Hard to believe. It's been going that fast. And that's what happens. Every semester, that's what happens. So today, we are going to be talking about asking big questions. First of all, what are big questions? And then how to ask big questions. Today's story is The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula K. Le Guin. And it definitely asks some big questions. So that's what we have coming at us right now. So let's go ahead. I'm going to get the presentation running. And drop us in where we need to be. So like I said, today we're talking about confronting big questions. So let's just jump right in, shall we? All right. When encountering an argument, whether it's written or spoken, we should always ask questions. And I remember when I was a kid, this would be something I used to kind of get in trouble for, right? Well, did you ask any questions? Did you find out what their parents do? Did you find out where they live? Blah, blah, blah. And I'd always be like, all right. I didn't know how to ask questions. As I've gotten older and I began to understand the concept of good questions and how to get information from people, I find it a much easier process to ask big questions. And so we're going to talk about that today, because if you're going to participate effectively in argument, sharpen your listening skills, you need to be able to ask big questions. So there are three big questions that should be the first, especially when we're participating in critical thinking. That should be the first that come to mind. And those are these. What surprised or interested you? So when you are reading an argument, you're reading an article, you're reading a short story, you're reading a novel, you're watching a movie, you're watching a television show, you're watching a documentary, whatever it is that's coming at you, it's an argument. So what surprised or interested you? Ask that question. Think about it. Come up with a response. What did the author think you already knew? What did the author or the producer think that you already knew about the subject? Think about that. You can tell from the content of the language, things that they've omitted, things that they've included. What did they think you already knew? I've come across some articles sometimes where I read them and the words, I'm pretty good with vocabulary, but sometimes I come across an article that goes over my head because the language in it is difficult. It's on a different level. And so the author of that article was obviously writing that piece for a different audience than me. Because when you write an article, you need to know that your language is going to be accessible to those who are going to read what you've written. And so this would have been written to a different audience than myself, and the author would have believed that they already understood that language. So, what challenged, changed, or confirmed what you already knew about the topic? Sit with that after you read. What challenged what you believe? Did it change what you believe? Did it confirm what you believe? These are great, big, strong questions for us to ask. I have a few quotes that have been attributed to Einstein in this presentation. You never know with memes, but they're still good quotes. And so I'm going to share those with you throughout this presentation. I like this one here. It says, the important thing is not to stop questioning. We need to be question askers. So let's take a look at each one of these individually. Big question number one. What surprised me? So there are 4 different categories of surprise. The first one is new information. I didn't know that. Did you come across new information? Did you come across suspicious information? Did you hear it and go, I don't know about that. Number three, was there clarifying information where you had a, oh, I get it kind of reaction? And four, did you have a different perspective? I hadn't thought about it that way before. So what surprised me, this is an umbrella to these further categories. Is it new information? Suspicious information? Not sure about that. Is it clarifying information? Or is it an altogether new idea? Something completely different that you had not perceived before. So that's dealing with big question number one. Big question number two, what did the author think I already knew? So there are four types of problems that are identified here. Number one, the author thought I'd know what this word means, right? So I already mentioned that vocabulary issue, right? So the author is assuming that you would already have the knowledge of these words. Number two, the author thought I could picture this. So when an author writes a thing, when we write an argument, we write a story, we believe that the word choices that we have given to our reader are going to help them clearly be able to see it in their mind and understand it. So this is what the author thought you already knew. Was the author effective? The author thought I'd know something about this. So they're trying to make connections to prior knowledge. Did the author think you already had insight into what it is that they are discussing? And number four, the author thought I'd get how that happens. Right? So the author is thinking that you're going to understand their sequencing or their causal relationships, that their argument is clear. So the author thinks that you're already ready for these things. Obviously, if they put the information together in such a way, you might ask yourself, am I actually the intended audience here? I can tell sometimes I am not. I am definitely not an intended audience. Big question number three, but that doesn't mean I can't read it and get something out of it. Just saying. Number three, what challenge changed or confirmed what I knew? This question doesn't emphasize memorizing data from a text. It doesn't tell a student that he is right or wrong. It does tell the student that changing your mind is respectable and should happen occasionally. It respects the student's response by asking how the text shaped their thinking. It equips them with observations that should help them talk about it. So asking this big question really gets us thinking and puts us into the text considering, has this challenged me? Has it changed me? Does it confirm something I already knew? Big ideas to talk about when you are reading an argument, a story, watching a show, a movie, etc. So when asking yourself questions, which you should, oh, actually, let's move me around. Yep, that is what it says. When asking yourself questions. These are the types of questions that you should ask yourself. How has your life been different than what you imagined? That's an excellent question to ask yourself. It's very important to get to know who you are. And we do that well by spending some time with ourselves and digging in with these type of questions. Notice how these are who, what, where, why, and how questions, as were the three big questions: what. Important to notice that. So who am I? Sit with that for a while. Who are you? Where do I fit? Sit with that for a while. Think about it. Maybe write some things down. What are 5 pivotal shifts in my life? Oh, I had my creative writing students do this last semester, and it was very interesting. 5 different things that have occurred in your life that have shifted the course of your life. 5 decisions, 5 events, car accident perhaps. 5 pivotal shifts. How did you come to your faith? Perhaps you want to try to tell me that you don't have faith. My response is going to be, that's still faith. You have to have faith in something as much as you have faith in nothing. To believe that nothing exists is faith. It's kind of the way I see all that. It's where I've landed after 50 years of conversations with people. What difference can I make? That's something to ponder. What difference can I make? And be honest with yourself. Don't sit back and go, oh, none. I can't make any difference. Is that right? Is that right? Or could you, like I suggested the other week, when you have nothing else going on, go over to the nursing home and sit down and talk to some people. Ask them questions about their lives and give them an opportunity to talk. That is making a difference. There are many ways to do this. You could do this in the grocery store line. You can just be kind to your checker, kind to the people around you. Help someone with their groceries. There's lots of different ways to make a difference. When I think about dying, am I scared? It's a very good question to ask yourself. And how do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered? How do you want to be remembered? These are all great questions to ask yourself, which is important. We should always be asking ourselves questions so we can move forward, because great questions lead to great interactions, and we want to have great interactions with others. So we need to be comfortable asking great questions. If you truly want to engage a prospect or a client, instead of talking, it is actually more critical to listen. The key to engagement is interaction. Most, and I really mean most, people are focused on themselves and are more than ready to talk about themselves and their products. But how do you get the other person to begin talking? Great questions lead to great interaction and will allow you to be in control of the conversation while gaining all the benefits of listening and learning about the other person. But sometimes the questions we ask just don't work. Now, I'm taking this information from redzonemarketing.com, powerful questions to ask. Asking questions effectively. Want to make sure that we're asking them effectively. If you ask the wrong questions, you'll probably get the wrong answer, or at least not quite what you were hoping for. By using the right questions in a particular situation, you can improve a whole range of communication skills. You can gather better information and learn more, build stronger relationships, manage people more effectively, help others learn, and most importantly, create lasting connections. We need to ask effective questions. Einstein is attributed with this. If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would use the first 55 minutes determining the proper questions to ask. So what type of questions do we ask? Big questions. The key is to take a typical question you ask, but ask it with a few extra words. When adding certain words, you create what we call a big question. A big question is one that requires an answer beyond yes or no. It opens up conversation and allows you to create the connection that happens where you listen. Questions that are asked of a prospect, like, how is your health, typically result in a bit of a lie. Good, fine, the prospect says, because he or she is not sure they want to do business with you yet, much less engage by divulging this information. But if they begin talking about things that are important to them, and in the case of health, that we really need to know in order to put together a financial strategy, the results are positive. On average, a person will give you 5 answers to one question. as opposed to zero answers. While they're talking, you are connecting and developing a relationship and learning if we are asking big questions. Albert Einstein attributed, "It's not that I'm so smart, but I stay with the questions much longer." Big questions use absolute words, including one, biggest, favorite, best, worst, only, etc. Examples of big questions to ask. What is your biggest health concern? Instead of how's your health, do you see the difference? How's your health? Well, I can say, oh, fine. But what is your biggest health concern? Requires me to go, well, and you're going to get more of an answer from a good question. I know your business has received a lot of awards. What was the most meaningful one to you? What was the most meaningful one to you? That way you get them talking. What's your biggest challenge? What's your greatest strength? What's your worst weakness? Those are all excellent questions. And you're requiring an answer by asking it this way. Or if you're in a competitive situation, ask, what is the one thing you wished your current advisor would do? This will usually give you everything you need to know. The key is to ask a question that requires an answer so that you can listen in to something that is important to them. Get them talking about themselves. Strong interviewers ask big questions because they're getting you talking. And if you want to be effective at the end of an interview when they say to you, do you have any questions for us? You should have some big questions prepared to ask them. In my interview for the position I have now, I asked them, what is your favorite thing about working in this environment? Totally turned the conversation and it almost became I was interviewing them. They all started sharing, there were 5 of them, they all started sharing their different ideas and I was asking more questions and it turned into a whole conversation. It was fantastic. Ask big questions. Einstein is attributed with saying, I have no special talents. I'm only passionately curious. I love that. How do you ask the right questions? As a strategic leader, the right questions are your best and most often used strategy tool. Questions serve as your guide on your journey to better understanding situations. Choosing your questions wisely often determines the fruitfulness of your journey. Here are some tips for asking the best questions. Use open-ended questions. Open-ended questions don't have a simple yes or no answer. Avoid yes or no answers. Avoid asking those questions. And when you are asked a yes or no question, don't simply give a yes or no answer. Always say yes because or no because and give a full response. Open-ended questions allow conversations and problem solving to build and grow, whereas yes or no questions quickly shut down the conversation. So we need to be thinking before we ask our questions, is this a yes or no? Don't ask it. Rephrase it. Ask it open-endedly. Shut up and listen. Oh, this is from Stratechi.com, The Power of Questions. So get mad at them for their wording. Just kidding. Shut up and listen. Always be aware and mindful of how much time you are talking versus asking questions and listening. We've all been through the being talked at disease that some people have, and it is such a turnoff. And as you listen to someone's answers to your question, process it and think about other hypotheses you may have and any other questions you need to be answered. Use the 5 W's and 1 H for just about anything. Who, what, why, where, when, and how. You want to come across with a great question? Start with those words and ask questions that require a response beyond a one-word answer. Exercises to improve your ability to ask the right questions. Number one is build your awareness. How often do you or others ask questions? In your next conversation or meeting, tally up how many questions people ask and who is asking the questions. What types of questions are you asking? Open-ended, rhetorical, prioritization, why, when, how, etc. What do you notice when people ask different types of questions? Do you think you should ask more or fewer questions? Look at all of those questions inside of there. They're all good questions. Exercise 2, create a question guide. Before your next important meeting, like an interview, write down the questions you need to be answered, and then be sure to ask them during the meeting. Even more powerful, if you are one of the leaders of the meeting, prioritize and post the questions on the whiteboard and start the meeting by saying, "These are the questions we need to answer during this meeting. Are there any others? And are they in the right order?" Ooh, that's a fun idea. Then structure the meeting around answering those questions. What a great way to have a meeting with good resolution. Have questions prepared in advance. Let your audience, your room, help you put them into the right order, and then go for it. Number 3, determine the most powerful questions for you. Okay? As you incorporate more questions into your conversations and interactions with people, start playing around with different types of questions in different situations to see which ones are the most powerful. Open-ended questions are really useful when you want to understand the context. Forced prioritization questions, what are the top 3 most important, are great to help prioritize thinking. Wrap questions. What are the next steps? Help drive to the next steps and actions. The 5 W's and 1 H are perfect when you are planning an initiative, working on an idea, or problem solving. We have to get those down. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Number 4, read a room. Oh yeah, I love doing this. The world is made up of introverts and extroverts, and most meetings or conversations are dominated by extroverts, often at the expense of the quality of interaction and insights. Next time you're in a meeting, read the room and see who is dominating the conversation, and then reroute the conversation by asking someone that had been fairly quiet, what are your thoughts on the topic? Good questions. They're important for us. They're going to get us to the heart of not only ourselves, but in our interactions with others. They will help us formulate strong arguments when writing papers. Pose these big ideas, great questions, and answer those great questions in the text of your article or your essay. Here are some great questions we ask. What is my reaction? What surprised me? What did the author think I already knew? When was this written? And why, or what was happening in the world that caused it to be written? Who is the author? What did that person experience in their life that suggests the reason for the writing of this story or article? What is the author's intended meaning based on the historical context and the author's life experiences? What specific choices did the author make regarding the inclusion of literary elements in order to structure the piece in a way that an audience could grasp the meaning of the story or the article? How did the author use logos, ethos, pathos? What specific impact did or does this story or article have on the world at large? How specifically does this story or article affect you? And what challenged, confirmed, or changed what I knew? Do those questions seem familiar? They should. Those are our Blackboard discussion questions that we're using with every piece that we read. We're already working with big questions. Something to remember. Love this. Routine has nothing to do with repetition. To become really good at anything, you have to practice and repeat until the technique becomes intuitive. And this is from Paulo Coelho. And my colleague Miguel works in the office next door to me, and I asked him how to pronounce this, and he said it was Coelho. So that's what we're going with. So this is a great quote, and it's attributed to this guy right here. This is his picture, Paulo Coelho. Okay, great, right? Great. Let's move on. Does it impact you? How has this quote impacted you? Probably not a whole lot, not just yet. Why? Why has this quote not impacted us just yet? Well, probably because the majority of us don't know who Paulo Coelho is. So let's take a look. Let's discover and learn who is this gentleman and why does his quote matter? Does that sound familiar? Some of your essays, I write that kind of thing when you haven't done setups or signal phrases on your essays. Who is this person and why does his quote matter? So here we go. Let's learn a little bit about Paulo. This Brazilian author is considered one of the most influential authors of our times. His books have sold more than 320 million copies worldwide, have been released in 170 countries, and been translated into 83 languages. He was born in Rio de Janeiro in 1947. He soon discovered his vocation for writing. He worked as a director, a theater actor, a songwriter, and a journalist. His collaboration with Brazilian composer and singer Raul Seixas gave some of the greatest classic rock songs in Brazil. In 1986, a special meeting led him to make the pilgrimage to St. James Compostela in Spain. The road to Santiago was not only a common pilgrimage, but a turning point in his existence. A year later, he wrote The Pilgrimage, an autobiographical novel that is considered the beginning of his career. In the following year, Coelho published The Alchemist. Some of you at this point might go, oh. Slow initial sales convinced his first publisher to drop the novel, but it went on to become an international best-selling phenomenon, remaining on the New York Times bestseller list for over, get this, 427 consecutive weeks. What? We're talking like 8 years. Other titles include, and then it lists out a lot of his other work. Brida, The Valkyries, By the River Piedra, I Sat Down and Wept, The Fifth Mountain, Manual of a Warrior of Light, Veronica Decides to Die, The Devil and Miss Prim, 11 Minutes, The Zahir, Like the Flowing River, The Witch of Portobello, The Winter Stands Alone, Olive, Manuscript Found in Accra, Adultery, and Hippie. He has received numerous prestigious international awards, including the Hans Christian Andersen Award, the Grinzane Cavour Book Award, and the Chevalier de la... Oh, I'm not even going to pretend to try to pronounce this. I do not speak French. He has been a member of the Academy of Letters of Brazil since 2002 and a Messenger of Peace by the United Nations since 2007. In 2003, he received the Guinness World Record for most translations of a single title, The Alchemist. Signed by the author in one sitting, and several years after, in 2009, he received a new Guinness World Record for the most translated author for the same book. The man behind the author likes to write and practices Kyoto, a meditative kind of archery. He loves reading, walking, football, and computers. In that sense, he has always maintained a close contact with his readers, but now, and thanks to the new media, he has established an incredible feedback with them. Paulo was the second most influential celebrity on Twitter in 2010, according to Forbes, and he is the writer with the highest number of followers on social media. Coelho and Christina, this foundation, with its seat in Geneva, Switzerland, was established as a not-for-profit foundation in 2014. In 2018, the foundation merged with the Paulo Coelho and Christina Charitable Foundation. So this is a pretty fascinating man. 320 million copies sold, right? He is a leader in his social media following. He wrote The Alchemist, which was on the New York Times bestseller list for 427 consecutive weeks. He practices meditative archery, reading, walking, football. He loves computers. He's interacting on social media. He's written widely. He's been involved in songwriting, acting. He's been all over the place. So, when we read this quote, now, routine has nothing to do with repetition. To become really good at anything, you have to practice and repeat until the technique becomes intuitive. Now, because we know who Paulo is, even just a little bit, the quote has credibility. We know that he knows what he's talking about. His life is evidence of this quote. This is what I want you to do in your essays, and not just in your essays. Anytime that you're going to quote someone, whether you're speaking or whatever you're doing, give it a setup, establish credibility so that whoever's listening to you can trust the information that you're sharing. Great idea. You're welcome. Build your argument, strengthens your argument, increases your word count, establishes credibility. Please do that for yourself. Telling who said a thing builds ethos in your argument. Now we're going to play a game. Now, if we were actually in the class together, we would do this. But since we're not, this is an online group. This is what I do to my online class or to my in-person classes. So I take a bunch of strips of paper and I pass them out to the class. And everybody opens up their paper because they're folded. Everybody opens up their paper and one person gets the black dot. Does this remind you of another story? And everybody in the room goes, crap. Right? So funny. And so then I say this. I will give A's to the whole class for the semester if the individual with the black spot is designated to get an F. What do you think? Are we good with that? Is everybody good with that? And usually the person with the black dot's going, no, no. And across the room, I'll see some people go, yeah. And other people will be horrified, like, oh my God, no, that's not okay. Right? Super funny. And I would so do this to you if we were in a classroom together, but we're not. But this is our setup, our lead-in for today's story. This is The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula K. Le Guin. In your textbook, it does begin on page 767. I have also given you the text, a PDF version online or on Blackboard. And you can also type it in online, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, Ursula K. Le Guin, PDF. And you will find the text of the story. So just like with all the others, you have multiple means of finding and locating this so that you can follow along, right? I have an audiobook attached here for you, but I don't think I'm going to play it. It's kind of fun, though. It's kind of fun. I just don't really like the way that the guy pronounces Omelas. He says Omelas. And that just kind of like is like nails on chalkboard to me. So I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. So here we go with The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. Follow along, have a pen or your keyboard, make notes, highlight, mark logos, pathos, and ethos as we go. Anything that jumps out at you, you need to mark it. With the clamor of bells that set the swallow soaring, the festival of summer came to the city Omelas, bright towered by the sea. The rigging of the boats in harbor sparkled with flags. In the streets between the houses, with red roofs and painted walls, between old moss-grown gardens and under the avenues of trees, past great parks and built public buildings, processions moved. Some were decorous, old people in long stiff robes of mauve and gray, grave master workmen, quiet, Merry women carrying their babies and chatting as they walked. In other streets, the music beat faster, a shimmering of gong and tambourine, and the people went dancing. The procession was a dance. Children dodged in and out, their high calls rising like the swallows crossing flights over the music and the singing. All the processions wound toward the north side of the city, where on the great water meadow called the Green Fields, boys and girls, naked in the bright air, with mud-stained feet and ankles and long, lithe arms, exercised their restive horses before the race. The horses wore no gear at all but a halter without bit. Their manes were braided with streamers of silver, gold, and green. They flared their nostrils and pranced and boasted to one another. They were vastly excited, the horse being the only animal who has adopted our ceremonies as his own. Far off to the north and west, the mountains stood up half encircling Omelas on her bay. The air of morning was so clear that the snow crowning the 18 peaks burned with white gold fire across the miles of sunlit air under the dark blue of the sky. There was just enough wind to make the banners that marked the race course snap and flutter now and then. In the silence of the broad green meadows, one could hear the music winding through the city streets, farther and nearer, and ever approaching. A cheerful faint sweetness of the air that from time to time trembled and gathered together and broke out into the great joyous clanging of the bells. Joyous! How is one to tell about joy? How describe the citizens of Omelas? They were not simple folk, you see, though they were happy. But we do not say the words of cheer much any more. All smiles have become archaic. Given a description such as this, one tends to make certain assumptions. Given a description such as this, one tends to look for the king, mounted on a splendid stallion and surrounded by his noble knights, or perhaps in a golden litter borne by great muscled slaves. But there was no king. They did not use swords or keep slaves. They were not barbarians. I do not know the rules and laws of their society, but I suspect that they were singularly few. As they did without monarchy and slavery, so they also got on without the stock exchange, the advertisement, the secret police, and the bomb. Yet I repeat that these were not simple folk, not dulcet shepherds, noble savages, bland utopians. They were not less complex than us. The trouble is that we have a bad habit, encouraged by pedants and sophisticates, of considering happiness as something rather stupid. Only pain is intellectual. Only evil is interesting. This is the treason of the artist, a refusal to admit the banality of evil and the terrible boredom of pain. If you can't lick 'em, join 'em. If it hurts, repeat it. But to praise despair is to condemn delight. To embrace violence is to lose hold of everything else. We have almost lost hold. We can no longer describe a happy man nor make a celebration of joy. How can I tell you about the people of Omelas? They were not naive and happy children, though their children were, in fact, happy. They were mature, intelligent, passionate adults whose lives were not wretched. Oh, miracle! But I wish I could describe it better. I wish I could convince you. Omelas sounds in my words like a city in a fairy tale, long ago and far away, once upon a time. Perhaps it could be best if you imagined it as your own fancy bids, assuming it will rise to the occasion, for certainly I cannot suit you all. For instance, how about technology? I think that there would be no cars or helicopters in and above the streets. This follows from the fact that the people of Omelas are happy people. Happiness is based on a just discrimination of what is necessary, what is neither necessary nor destructive, and what is destructive. In the middle category, however, that of the unnecessary but undestructive, that of comfort, luxury, exuberance, etc. They could perfectly well have central heating, subway trains, washing machines, and all kinds of marvelous devices not yet invented here, floating light sources, fuelless power, a cure for the common cold. Or they could have none of that. It doesn't matter. As you like it. I incline to think that people from towns up and down the coast have been coming into Omelas during the last days before the festival on very fast little trains and double-deck trams, and that the train station at Omelas is actually the handsomest building in town, though plainer than the magnificent farmers' market. But even granted trains, I fear that Omelas so far strikes some of you as goody-goody. Smiles, bells, parades, horses, blah. If so, please add an orgy. If an orgy would help, don't hesitate. Let us not, however, have temples from which issue beautiful nude priests and priestesses, already half in ecstasy and ready to copulate with any man or woman, lover or stranger, who desires union with the deep Godhead of the blood, although that was my first idea. But really, it would be better not to have any temples in Omelas, at least not man temples. Religion, yes. Clergy, no. Surely the beautiful nudes can just wander about offering themselves like divine souffles to the hunger of the needy and the rapture of the flesh. Let them join in processions. Let tambourines be struck above the copulations and the glory of desire be proclaimed upon the gongs. And, a not unimportant point, let the offspring of these delightful rituals be beloved and looked after by all. One thing I know that there is none of in Omelas is guilt. But what else should there be? I thought at first there were not drugs, but that is puritanical. For those who like it, the faint, insistent sweetness of Druse may perfume the ways of the city, Druse which first brings a great lightness and brilliance to the mind and limbs, and then after some hours a dreamy languor, and wonderful visions at last of the very arcana and inmost secrets of the universe, as well as exciting the pleasure of sex beyond belief, and it is not habit-forming. For more modest tastes, I think there ought to be beer. What else? What else belongs in the joyous city? The sense of victory, surely. The celebration of courage. But as we did without clergy, let us do without soldiers. The joy built upon successful slaughter is not the right kind of joy. It will not do. It is fearful, and it is trivial. A boundless and generous contentment, a magnanimous triumph felt not against some outer enemy, but in communion with the finest and fairest in the souls of all men everywhere in the splendor of the world's summer. This is what swells the hearts of the people of Omelas, and the victory they celebrate is that of life. I really don't think many of them even need to take Druse. Most of the procession have reached the green fields by now. A marvelous smell of cooking goes forth from the red and blue tents of the provisioners. The faces of small children are amiably sticky. In the benign gray beard of a man, a couple of crumbs of rich pastry are entangled. The youths and girls have mounted their horses and are beginning to group around the starting line of the course. An old woman, small, fat, and laughing, is passing out flowers from a basket, and tall young men wear her flowers in their shining hair. A child of 9 or 10 sits at the edge of the crowd, alone, playing on a wooden flute. People pause to listen, and they smile. But they do not speak to him, for he never ceases playing and never sees them, his dark eyes wholly wrapped in the sweet, thin magic of the tune. He finishes, and slowly lowers his hand holding the wooden flute. As if that little private silence were the signal, all at once a trumpet sounds from the pavilion near the starting line. Imperious, melancholy, piercing. The horses rear on their slender legs, and some of them neigh in answer. Sober-faced, the young riders stroke the horses' necks and soothe them, whispering, "Quiet, quiet, there, my beauty, my hope." They begin to form in rank along the starting line. The crowds along the racecourse are like a field of grass and flowers in the wind. The festival of summer has begun. Do you believe? Do you accept the festival? The city? The joy? No? Then let me describe one more thing. In a basement, under one of the beautiful public buildings of Omelas, or perhaps in the cellar of one of its spacious private homes, there is a room. It has one locked door and no window. A little light seeps in dustily between cracks in the boards, secondhand from cobweb windows somewhere across the cellar. In one corner of the little room, a couple of mops with stiff-clotted, foul-smelling heads stand near a rusty bucket. The floor is dirt, a little damp to the touch, as cellar dirt usually is. The room is about 3 paces long and 2 wide, a mere broom closet or disused tool room. In the middle of the room, a child is sitting. It could be a boy or a girl. It looks about 6, but actually is nearly 10. It is feeble-minded. Perhaps it was born defective, or perhaps it has become imbecile through fear, malnutrition, and neglect. It picks its nose and occasionally fumbles vaguely with its toes or genitals as it sits hunched in the corner farthest from the bucket and the 2 mops. It is afraid of the mops. It finds them horrible. It shuts its eyes, but it knows the mops are still standing there, and the door is locked, and nobody will come. The door is always locked, and nobody ever comes, except that sometimes. The child has no understanding of time or interval. Sometimes the door rattles terribly and opens, and a person or several people are there. One of them may come in and kick the child to make it stand up. The others never come close, but peer at it with frightened, disgusted eyes. The food bowl and the water jug are hastily filled, and the door is locked. The eyes disappear. The people at the door never say anything, but the child, who has not always lived in the tool room and can remember the sunlight and its mother's voice, sometimes speaks. "I will be good," it says. "Please let me out. I will be good." They never answer. The child used to scream for help at night and cry a good deal, but now it only makes a kind of whining, "Yeah, yeah," and it speaks less and less often. It is so thin that there are no calves to its legs. Its belly protrudes. It lives on a half bowl of cornmeal and grease a day. It is naked. Its buttocks and thighs are a mass of festered sores as it sits in its own excrement continually. They all know it is there. All the people of Omelas. Some of them have come to see it. Others are content merely to know it is there. They all know that it has to be there. Some of them understand why, and some do not. But they all understand that their happiness, the beauty of their city, the tenderness of their friendships, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skill of their makers, even the abundance of their harvest and the kindly weathers of their skies, depend wholly on this child's abominable misery. This is usually unexplained, or this is usually explained to children when they are about or between 8 and 12, whenever they seem capable of understanding. And most of those who come to see the child are young people, though often enough an adult comes or comes back to see the child. No matter how well the matter has been explained to them, these young spectators are always shocked and sickened at the sight. They feel disgust, which they had thought themselves superior to. They feel anger, outrage, impotence, despite all the explanations. They would like to do something for the child, but there is nothing they can do. If the child were brought up into the light, out of that vile place, if it were cleaned and fed and comforted, that would be a good thing indeed. But if it were done, in that day and hour, all the prosperity and beauty and delight of Omelas would wither and be destroyed. Those are the terms, to exchange all the goodness and grace of every life in Omelas for that single small improvement, to throw away the happiness of thousands for the chance of the happiness of one. That would be to let guilt within the walls, indeed. The terms are strict and absolute. There may not even be a kind word spoken to the child. Often the young people go home in tears or in a tearless rage. When they have seen the child and faced this terrible paradox, they may brood over it for weeks or years, but as time goes on, they begin to realize that even if the child could be released, it would not get much good of its freedom. A little vague pleasure of warmth and food, no doubt, but little more. It is too degraded and imbecile to know any real joy. It has been afraid too long ever to be free of fear. Its habits are too uncouth for it to respond to humane treatment. Indeed, after so long, it would probably be wretched without walls about it to protect it, and darkness for its eyes and its own excrement to sit in. Their tears at the bitter injustice dry when they begin to perceive the terrible justice of reality and to accept it. Yet it is their tears and anger, the trying of their generosity and the acceptance of their helplessness, which are perhaps the true source of the splendor of their lives. Theirs is no vapid, irresponsible happiness. They know that they, like the child, are not free. They know compassion. It is the existence of the child and their knowledge of its existence that makes possible the nobility of their architecture, the poignancy of their music, the profundity of their science. It is because of the child that they are so gentle with children. They know that if the wretched one were not there sniveling in the dark, the other one, the flute player, could make no joyful music as the young riders line up in their beauty for the race in the sunlight of the first morning of summer. Now, do you believe in them? Are they not more credible? But there is one more thing to tell, and this is quite incredible. At times, one of the adolescent girls or boys who go to see the child does not go home to weep or rage, does not, in fact, go home at all. Sometimes also a man or woman much older falls silent for a day or two and then leaves home. These people go out into the street and walk down the streets alone. They keep walking and walk straight out of the city of Omelas through the beautiful gates. They keep walking across the farmlands of Omelas. Each one goes alone, youth or girl, man or woman. Night falls. The traveler must pass down village streets between the houses with yellow-lit windows and on out into the darkness of the fields. Each alone, they go west or north toward the mountains. They go on. They leave Omelas. They walk ahead into the darkness and they do not come back. The place they go towards is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is possible that it does not exist. But they seem to know where they are going, the ones who walk away from Omelas. If we were in the classroom together right now, we'd just let you sit with that for a few minutes, kind of watch the room, and then ask, what are your thoughts? What is your emotional response? Generally with this piece, we don't make it very far into going through the discussion questions. I mean, you will because you're filling them out on paper. But in the actual in-class discussion, we generally don't make it very far. Because this story begins to remind us of our own world and our own lives. And we begin to draw correlations in our own lives where the happiness of all is dependent upon the suffering of a few. Perhaps you already have some situations coming to your mind. A lot of times students will mention fast fashion. We all know that a lot of the clothes that we purchase in the fast fashion industry are being made in third world conditions, often by children, definitely by people in slavery conditions. We know that, but we buy it anyway. That's just one example. So as you're answering the questions, you need to know something about Ursula K. Le Guin. In the PowerPoint, I've included some information about Ursula. It says here, cultural anthropology, Taoism, feminism, and the writings of Carl Jung all had a strong influence on Le Guin's work. So I've given you a definition down here of cultural anthropology and of Taoism. The next page here, I mean, I would read all of this. The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas is a, what year was this written? I can't see it because that's in front of it. 1973, so I was 1 year old when this was written. That's how old this is. It's 49, almost 50 years old. It's a 1973 work of short philosophical fiction. With deliberately both vague and vivid descriptions, the narrator depicts a summer festival in the utopian city of Omelas, whose prosperity depends on the perpetual misery of a single child. The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas was nominated for the Locus Award for Best Short Fiction in 1974 and won the Hugo Award for Best Short Fiction in 1974. Now, I like to read these next two parts here. The central idea of this psychomyth, the scapegoat, writes Le Guin, turns up in Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, and several people have asked me, rather suspiciously, why I gave the credit to William James. The fact is, I haven't been able to reread Dostoevsky, much as I loved him, since I was 25, and I'd simply forgotten that he had used the idea. But when I met it in James, the moral philosopher and the moral life, it was with a shock of recognition. The quote from William James is this: or if the hypothesis were offered to us of a world in which Messieurs Fourier's and Bellamy's and Morris's utopias should all be outdone, and millions kept permanently happy on the one simple condition that a certain lost soul on the far-off edge of things should lead a life of lonely torture, what except a skeptical and independent sort of emotion can it be which would make us immediately feel, even though an impulse arose within us to clutch at the happiness so offered, how hideous a thing would be its enjoyment when deliberately accepted as the fruit of such a bargain. This hit Le Guin, and as a result, she wrote The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. Dostoevsky's original description of the dilemma refers to the doctrine of salvation through the crucifixion of Jesus, the happiness of many on the suffering of one. And so she wrote this piece. And for years, it has been causing reflection, internal reflection, reflection on society, reflection on self. A few years ago, I had gotten a little bit bored with my Comp 2 curriculum, and every now and then I have to change things up just so I can keep myself passionate and entertained. And when a professor gets to a point where they're kind of like, with what they're doing, they need to change things. And so I reached out to my high school English teacher who, over some time, and especially with the advent of Facebook, I had become friends with. And I reached out to Mrs. Allen and I said, help. I need to know, because I had been looking through other short stories. I had been reading other short stories. I'd been trying to come across something that was going to be impactful. And I said, help. Give me a short story that I can use that's going to be impactful in the classroom. And her response was immediate. The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula K. Le Guin, she said. I had never read it. It wasn't something that she had shared with us in high school. And so I took some time and I read it. And I was blown away. By the thoughts that came afterwards. So I put it into the curriculum, and as students would write, some would write essays on this particular story, I would share those with her. It's pretty exciting. So I got to say to her, Mrs. Allen, look what your idea is doing. Look how your idea is impacting my students. Mrs. Allen passed away a couple of years ago. So very grateful for her impact upon my life and upon the lives of many of my students. So we can thank Mrs. Allen for the inclusion of this story into our semester. She was a beautiful woman, and I'm very grateful for her influence. So let's talk a little bit more about how this story reflects in our world. If we were in the classroom together, we could share ideas back and forth. But I'm going to just bring up the one that it really brings to my mind, and that is trafficking. And I've been talking about trafficking in relation with this story for about 3 years, maybe 4. So the movie The Sound of Freedom just was released this summer, July the 4th, it was released. I've been waiting for its release for at least 3 years. It was 3 years ago that I found out about the movie. It was 5 years ago that they finished it in production. And so all this time, people have kept it from being released. The powers that be did not want it to be released because of the information contained inside of it. It is out now, and you can see it, and I highly recommend that you do. But it is centered on this horrific truth in our world: trafficking. So let's take a look at some information regarding trafficking that we need to be aware of. Human trafficking is now the second most profitable criminal industry in the United States. Just a moment. I had an important note come through. All right. Human trafficking is now the second most profitable criminal industry in the United States. Now, the class that I was just teaching was talking with students in there, and one of them said that they had actually read somewhere that they're saying it is the number one criminal industry in the world now at this point, that it has surpassed the drug trade, was right here with the drug trade. And isn't it interesting that we all know the drug trade is a massive problem in the world, but trafficking hasn't been something that's been talked about, but here it is. Let's look at some statistical data. In the PowerPoint, you can click on these links that will take you to more information that you can look up for your own self, and I highly recommend that you do some research. Trafficking happens much more frequently than we know or would care to believe, and in our own communities. There are organizations here in Tulsa that help victims who have escaped or been able to get away, which is a very rare occurrence. So let's take a look at some statistics about trafficking. Estimates show that there are up to 27 million modern-day slaves worldwide. That's an estimate. This is only verifiable data that they have been able to collect. There are others that go under the radar. We have to keep that in mind with any statistics. And when we talked about that in another PowerPoint where we were looking at some statistical data when we were talking about the mental health crisis, 1 in 5, that's only reported data. It could be actually much higher. So 50% of victims are children, 80% are women and girls. 70% of female victims are trafficked into the commercial sex trade industry. 70%. The trafficking industry profits by $32 billion annually. Now, that is reported that they've been able to ascertain and collect information on. 244,000 American children and youth were estimated to be at risk of child sexual exploitation, including commercial sexual exploitation in the year 2000. That's some old data. 12 to 14 is the average age of entry into sex trafficking. Now, I don't know about you, but my life has been touched by this industry. I have a friend, I'm not going to say names or anything of that nature because this is a very serious thing, but I have a friend whose son, around the age of 14, was taken. And of course, the police were looking. It was her brother, who's also my friend, who took it upon himself to knock on doors and research and ask questions and foot the neighborhood himself, downtown St. Louis. He was able to find him and rescue him. He's a friend of my children's. He had been used for sex trafficking. Him and a girl. Fortunately for him, they were recovered. And like I said, that's a very rare occurrence. I'm going to share some statistical data with you here soon that shows that that is a very rare thing. I'm a former student whose mother escaped sex trafficking. They live in witness protection because her life is still in danger. If you escape, they come after you. That way you can't talk. UNICEF has some statistical data for us. So we can look at this here. First, a definition, because we always need a definition. What is human trafficking? Human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery that subjects children, women, and men to forced fraud or coercion for the purpose of commercial sexual exploitation or forced labor. This horrific practice can include prostitution, pornography, sex tourism, as well as labor for domestic service, factory, or construction work and migrant farming. You just don't know. You might go to a restaurant someday and the entire back staff is there as slaves. They all live in the same place. They're taken to work together. They all leave together. They're not allowed to have a life. They're paid very low wages and many times abused. This is happening all around us in every state in this country and globally. This is a global issue. This is not just the United States. According to some estimates, up to half of all victims may be children. Human trafficking has been reported in all 50 states in the United States. The U.S. is a source, destination, and transit point for trafficking victims all over the world. This is a source point. Human trafficking rates are particularly high in California, Texas, Florida, and New York. Entry points. Very easy to move your victims. Cargo containers, semi-trucks. Any given day in the United States, you're driving down a highway and a semi-truck passes you, it could be full of human cargo. Please don't be naive to that. You're like, oh, I saw that on a Law and Order Special Victims Unit once. Uh-huh. You need to start realizing that a lot of things that we see on television actually mimic real life. It's like, let's give it to them in a fiction way so they'll never believe that it could actually be true. There's always truth inside of stories. Victims suffer from physical, emotional, and sexual abuse and rarely have access to education or health care. Anyone can be trafficked regardless of class, education, gender, or age when forcefully coerced or lured by false promises. Here's a breakdown of the specific industries where labor trafficking and sex trafficking happens. Labor trafficking is in restaurants, bars, hotels, agriculture, construction, traveling sales crews. Sex trafficking, we see that in brothels, strip clubs, escort and massage services, pimp-controlled prostitution on the street and on the internet. Supply and demand. The high demand for cheap goods and commercial sex puts children around the world at risk of becoming the supply. One in 3 children is solicited for sex within 48 hours of running away or becoming homeless in the United States. Human trafficking is the second largest criminal industry in the world, reaping an estimated $32 billion in the trade of human beings. Does this not make you question who is participating in this? If it's pulling in $32 billion a year, probably more. 27 million estimated slaves. Who's buying? Who's selling? If it's happening in every city, every big city, in every state, and cities across the globe, who's doing it? Why didn't they want the Sound of Freedom movie to be released? People with money and power. Why can't we know who's doing this? This really should be putting some big questions into your head. Found this other site. This is SOS International. Their entire mission and goal is to rescue children and to help children all around the globe. And they share some human trafficking statistics. This is from October of 2020, so this information is 3 years old. Imagine what more has happened in the last 3 years. So first of all, I'm just going to read this. It says, what is human trafficking? Human trafficking is slavery. It is oppression and abuse, and it is happening day in and day out all over the world. According to the Department of Homeland Security, human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, and coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. More often than not, victims are unaware that they are entering a human trafficking situation. They think they are going to a new job opportunity, meeting a significant other, or even going on vacation. I've heard that there are girls who think that they're going to a photo shoot for modeling agencies. According to the U.S. Department of State, human trafficking can include, but does not require, movement. People may be considered trafficked victims regardless of whether they were born into a state of servitude, were exploited in their hometown, or transported to the exploitative situation, previously consented to work for a trafficker, or participated in a crime as a direct result of being trafficked. Now, this next page has the statistics. A victim of sex trafficking is on average raped 6,000 times. In 2019, 1 in 6 children reported missing in the U.S. was likely a victim of sex trafficking, and most were in the welfare system when they disappeared. Let that sink into you. And there's your source information right here, missingkids.org. The average victim of sex trafficking has a life expectancy of 7 years. That is from intofreedom.org. Sex trafficking accounts for 77% of human trafficking cases. PolarisProject.org. California and Texas consistently have the highest numbers for reports of human trafficking cases. WorldPopulationReview.com. That first one, go back to that. The source is intofreedom.org. The odds of escaping a human trafficking situation are 1%. This is from news.un.org. That makes me so emotional, obviously, because I'm a mother and a grandmother, but also because I'm a teacher who very much loves her students. 95% of girls born in a red light district will be sex trafficked and die in captivity. There are children born into the sex trafficking trade who never know life outside of it. Never know what it is to live in a home, to go to school, to have friends, to be normal. We take all those things for granted. Out of 40 million slaves in the world, see there we say 40 million. Others were reporting 27 because they don't want to admit that number. This is from ncbi.nlm.nih.gov. It's from a government site. 40 million slaves in the world, 1 in 4 is a child. So the next slide here contains all of those references. Again, with this PowerPoint, you can go to all those sites and read this information for yourself. And I'm sure that a lot of these sites have updated their information because you can see the dates on these 2020, 2018, 2020. All right. So we need to be informed. This SOS International, their website is sosresponse.org. Their goal is to be a voice for at-risk children. They say that the 4 areas of key impact are water around the world. They focus on helping with water purification around the world. That's an area that you could be involved in. Food, rescue efforts to rescue children out of slavery, and community development to help these communities with education around the world and other things. So you can dive into here on this sosresponse.org, because I know a lot of times we sit back and we go, well, what can I do? What can I do? How can I help? I'm just one person. Well, you look for organizations like this. If this is something that stirs you, that moves you, you want to know more what you could do to be impactful, they have a whole section here on helping fight human trafficking in your community. And they have a free toolkit that you can download and you can discover how to be of service in your own community. And I also would tell you at TCC, we have a professor named Kristen Marigioni, and she has some connections with organizations here in the Tulsa area that do work with sex trafficking victims. And so you have options. You do have options. Do some internet research. If this is something that's moving you, something that you want to know more about, and find out how you can be more of assistance or more aware in your day-to-day life, and be thinking about this Omelas story. It doesn't just relate to trafficking. There are many different aspects of our lives where we are just okay not knowing. And this is what Ursula was wanting us to talk about. She was wanting to stir conversation. She wanted people to be faced with the reality of our society. And she wrote this 50 years ago. A lesson from that is humans are humans, no matter what time period they live in. And if they can find a way to be happy on the back of suffering, someone else's suffering, hey, it doesn't affect me, I'm okay, it's going to happen. Can I be a voice for change? I try to be. I talk about it in my classes. I bring it up with this short story every time. I know that I've had students who've gone on to do research for themselves and to get involved into other projects. And some have even made like life-altering decisions as far as their career path based off of reading this short story. It's definitely something to think about, something to mull over and to consider its impact. Your homework is the ones who walk away from Omelas questions. Next week is week 11. There will be a very short video in which I will go over essay 3 and what the expectations are. So next week you'll have the whole week to take the building or the experience and argument exam and to be working on your essay number 3. So at the beginning of next week, open up the week, and there will be, like I said, there'll be a short video with an explanation of what we're going to be writing for this next round. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close the PowerPoint. And I'm going to say to you all, yes, it was a heavy, heavy day of class. I knew it was going to be. It just is. And we need to get better at asking questions. We need to be asking big questions and great questions, because great questions lead to information and they lead to interactions that are effective. They lead to answers. They lead to effective argument skills, which is our goal in this class. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to let you go and wish you a good week. Wish you a thoughtful week. And I will talk to you next week.